Thanks so much for joining me for another day of Vlogmas. We are talking all about my top 5 palettes and top 5-ish powders today because I definitely have 5 palettes that I love, but I think I have about 4 powders that I love. So let's start with eyeshadow palettes. We talked about this one when we talked about my Hermes favorites. So we've got here an Hermes eyeshadow palette. It's one of my favorite formulations out there. I have all of them, and if you saw that one, you will know that this one, 01, is my favorite palette. And I love this one because it's on the cooler side. Now it does have that pink shade in there, which is quite vibrant. I don't necessarily use that on the eyes, but if you look at the palette this way, it is a cool palette. It's really creamy going on, very easy to blend. It's very apparent in this darkest shade here, which I actually have on my eyes now. I used these 2 shades today for this eye look, and it was really, really fast. So if you've seen me use these palettes before, application is very easy. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to blend. In fact, I blend very, very little to get my eyeshadow on. And I always say, I feel like if with the dark matte, if that's a good shadow, the rest of the palette's usually pretty good. This is the one that can be patchy. If I'm going to see patchiness, I don't see that in these palettes, and specifically 01. I know this is a favorite for many of you as well. Then let's go to a powder. I feel like we're not gonna have very many surprises here because I talk about these so much, and that's really what this channel is about. That is finding the best of the best for you, and I try out all of these things so that you don't have to make those purchases that you won't use. So that's what this channel is all about, is to test out products and be able to measure them against the best. So we have here something that has shown up in so many videos. This is the Chantecaille Perfect Blur Powder. This is in light medium. I have it on now. Actually, I have this on with a few other powders. I think I applied 3 of the 4 powders I'm going to talk about today. So this was the second powder that I applied. I set it with a different powder that we'll talk about in a moment. It says Perfect Blur, and that's what it does. It blurs discoloration for me. It does a nice job of a little bit of color correcting because there's a bit of a peach tone in here. It really helps with my discoloration. And then also it blurs the surface of the skin as well. It looks smoother when this is applied. So if you're looking for a perfecting powder that provides a little bit of coverage, there's a little bit of color to this. It is not translucent, but it's the perfect shade for me. So I can apply this to the center of my face really nicely. I don't go to the exterior. I just don't want to build up any more makeup than I need, but this really helps me bring everything together, and also it helps blur if I go overboard with blush, which is very frequently. Number 2 here is one of the Clé de Peau palettes that I have. This one is in 01. This one has more of a brown tone. In fact, let me just double check the name. I can never remember the names, but I remember the numbers. This is Sand Dune. These pop out of the cases as well, which makes it really nice. If you like to purchase more than one palette, it's really nice for storage as well. That way you only have one that you are using at the time, and then you can store the rest of these in the little container it came in. That's what I do, so it definitely saves on space. But this one is Sand Dune. It's a beautiful neutral. I have actually ordered one more. I'm interested in more of the cool shades. I will gradually go through the rest of them. This is one of my most asked about palettes, either this 01 or 03 that of course we'll talk about in a moment here, but I thought I would just mention this again. I really enjoy these palettes, and I think they're so sophisticated. This one has a little bit more glow than 03 though. But if you're looking for something neutral on the cooler side, it's beautiful. Blendable, really flattering on the eye. If you want more minimal makeup, but you want a glow, then this is really pretty. This provides some dimension and definitely some glow. Onto a powder, we have here one, especially in the more warm months, this comes in really handy. This is by YSL. It is their All Hours Hyper Finish. And if you have more oily skin, you might want to consider this powder. It does a great job of controlling oil and looking really natural. This is a translucent powder, and it is translucent on me. I love how this really just meshes with the makeup, and it is certainly for those times when I need my makeup to last. It's a very hard-working powder, so if you're looking for a hard-working powder, this is a great one. Moving on to eyeshadow palettes, we've got this one by Chanel. And I recently took this out and was reminded why I enjoy this so much. This is the Le Beige Healthy Glow Natural Eyeshadow Palette in medium. And this is very subtle. It's a great representation of this whole Le Beige line. really just emphasizing natural beauty. That's what this palette does, and it leans on the cooler side, which I really like. And then you just have one shimmery shade, which is, again, very, very subtle. So if you are looking for something with just a slight amount of glow, really just to build dimension and bring a little bit of life to the eye area without looking like a whole lot of makeup, this is one of the most subtle eyeshadows that I have. I love it for exactly that reason. Very elegant, understated, effortless kind of palette. Looks like you didn't try too hard, but it also is buildable. So I think it's very versatile as well. One of those palettes that over and over keeps showing up as a favorite of mine. I consider this like a staple piece, like a white t-shirt, like a cardigan like this. This is really one of those palettes that is effortless elegance. Back to powders, we've got this Clé de Peau powder that so many of you have let me know that you also love. It's a little bit harder to get a hold of for some of you, but it's worth it because this is so finely milled. It really does beautify the skin while still setting. So it's not as heavy duty as something like the YSL. You can actually feel the difference in the texture with the YSL powder versus the Clé de Peau, because Clé de Peau is just really, really silky. And I feel like since the YSL is so hardworking, you can also feel that it's hardworking. It's not coarse, but this is really silky. So if you compare it to this, you're gonna feel some of the particles in there. Silky really is the best way I can describe this. It really does make the skin look even more beautiful without interfering with makeup. It works with all of the foundations that I have. I've not had any interactions with this and foundations. I count on this powder more in the fall, winter, spring before it gets too hot and my skin gets really oily. This works really well on my skin right now because it is more normal behaving. It doesn't have any oily breakouts or anything like that, and my makeup tends to last longer when I don't get oily. So this is really beautiful as well. You probably knew this was coming up, the other Clé de Peau palette that I have in 03. And of the two, this one is a little less glowy and it leans a little bit more on the purple side, although it's not purple, but once you put this on, you can see that there's a little bit of that hue. So if you like that, like a silvery, lavender almost tone to it, it brings focus to the eye area without being distracting. Sometimes when eye makeup is really interesting, it can also be distracting. So this is interesting and not distracting. So it just brings attention to the eyes and really builds that definition, adds just the slightest amount of color. And I get so many compliments and questions with this palette. So this is the one again in 03 Sun Dried Driftwood. So if you want something even slightly cooler and a little bit more color than one and slightly less glowy, this is one I pull for 3 Sun Dried Driftwood by Clé de Peau. Then for my fourth powder, we have here this teeny tiny little powder that when did I rediscover this? I think I've had, gosh, I don't know, several of these in the past, but I really have been pulling for this because I like the glow on my skin, and sometimes I just need to bring down the shine while maintaining the glow. So I especially like the glowiness on the exterior, but once it's concentrated on the interior of my face, it's a little bit too much. It looks like it's sticky, and it does tend to not set as well on the interior as it does on the exterior of my face. So I can really feel if there's potential for things to move around. So because I want that glowy look and not a shiny look, I will go in with this. So I actually have this on now too. So I started with a Clé de Peau, I went in with a Chantecaille after that, and then I finished off with Dim Light, actually after some of the blush products I put on. I have a few blush products happening here, and I'll talk about that in the blush video because I'll film that right after this. This does a nice job of keeping that glow, maintaining that glow while the makeup is set. So one of the purposes of powder is to set the makeup, especially if I'm more oily prone. I do need to do that, but I also don't want to take down the glow of the skin. And I think you can see it here. I can see it in the viewfinder. It is really nice and glowy. It looks really healthy, but it is set. And you have let me know that you do use this to buff all over your face to soften all of the lines. Like in this area, bronzer, blush, kind of bringing it all together. I think that's such a wise idea too. So if you are not super skilled at blending, I think going over with something like this where you're not covering up the makeup, but you are taking down a little bit of the intensity and softening the edges, I think that's a very wise idea. And then something like this kind of brush, like the Buff and Blur brush by Chantecaille, also helps with that buffing motion. If you're interested in a brush that has worked for me well, I like to pair these together. Oh, and I can't forget to mention that this also helps blur hyperpigmentation. So on very, very minimal days, I will go in with concealer, and then this, I will skip foundation altogether and then just use this to kind of blend everything together, and it works beautifully. And then my final eyeshadow palette of the top 5 is this one. You know, I had to include a Chanel palette. I still really love this. This has been a favorite palette in the past by Chanel. For the year, it was this palette. This is Tisse Rivoli, and I did use part of this today. I used this shade right here in the crease today to help blend some of that together, because that eyeshadow palette 01 by Hermes doesn't necessarily have an ideal shade for the crease, so I used this one from Tisse Rivoli today. So I combined a few different things, but this is very similar, and I've done a side-by-side between this Tisse Rivoli and the 03 by Clé the one in Sun-Dried Driftwood. So these two, we've got 3 by Clé here, Sun-Dried Driftwood, and Tisse Rivoli. They don't look exactly the same, but once applied, they look very, very similar on. And the main difference here is that this Tisse Rivoli has more detectable particles than this. This is a next generation type of formulation. This Clé de Peau, it's very soft, it's very elegant. This is elegant too, but I think that this is just an updated version almost, a more modern version of this. But this is very traditional, this Tisse Rivoli. And once on though, and from far away, they look virtually the same in terms of their tones. So there's a coolness about this. There's like a mocha and lavender, kind of a silvery almost element in there as well. So if you like this and you wanted to try a Clé de Peau palette, then I would try 3. And vice versa. If you love that Clé de Peau 03 and you wanted to try something by Chanel and know that you might really like the colors in the Chanel palette, then I would go with this one, Tisse Rivoli, because they are very, very similar looking. And those are amongst my most used palettes ever. So not so many new palettes to me as of this year. I'm trying to think. Maybe the Hermes was new to me this year, but I think the other ones are palettes I've had in the past, so they are tried and true. They withstand the test of time, as well as the powders. So the Clé de Peau powder, the Chantecaille powder, Hourglass, and the YSL is newer to me, and I have been looking for a powder that does that job of really absorbing oil well. So that was a nice addition to the powders that I have. But I'd love to know what your eyeshadow palettes are that you love, not just this year, but in the past, and which ones of those have withstood the test of time, as well as your powders. Please let us know in the comment section below, as well as your skin type when it comes to powder, because I think that makes a huge difference. But that is it for today's video, so please take care of each other, stay well. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you next time. It's the Hourglass, not Hourglass. This is the Le Beige Healthy Grow, not Healthy Glow. I was looking for a powder. Doesn't necessarily have a shadow that will serve as, what am I pointing at?